The night they left the baby to die, the land did not protest. The prairie lay still beneath a swollen moon, its tall grass bent low by an autumn wind that whispered like a warning no one wanted to hear. The sack hit the ground with a dull, shameful thud, just beyond the tree line where the dirt road curved away from the world. For a moment, the sack twitched. Then it stilled. A truck engine idled nearby, coughing smoke into the cold air, its headlights slicing across the field like blades. No one got out to check. No one knelt. No one looked back long enough to see the sack move again. Inside the sack, the baby screamed until the scream turned hoarse and thin. The fabric scratched her skin, coarse and smelling of grain and old sweat. Her arms were pinned awkwardly against her chest, her legs bent beneath her in a way that hurt. She did not know the word abandoned, or mercy, or death. She knew only cold. She knew hunger. And she knew the terrifying silence that followed when her cries no longer echoed back to her. The moonlight could not reach her. The wind could not soothe her. The world had narrowed to darkness and breath and the pounding of a tiny heart that did not understand why it had been left behind. The truck pulled away. Gravel spat beneath its tires, and the sound faded until it was swallowed by the vastness of the open land. The prairie returned to its watchful quiet. Coyotes yipped somewhere far off, their voices carrying like laughter through the dark. An owl lifted from a fence post and vanished soundlessly into the night. The sack lay motionless again, half hidden by grass and shadow. A secret the earth had been forced to keep. Hours passed. The temperature dropped. Frost crept across the ground like a slow invasion, silvering the weeds and stiffening the soil. The baby's cries came in weaker bursts now, each one shorter than the last. As if she were bargaining with the darkness. One more breath, one more sound, please. Her body shuddered uncontrollably. The sack no longer just scratched. It trapped the cold, pressed it against her skin until it felt like the cold was inside her, filling her lungs, crawling into her bones. She dreamed, because even babies dream. She dreamed of warmth she had never known how to name, of a voice that once existed, or maybe never did. Of something soft and close and alive. Her mouth opened again, shaping a sound that barely made it past her lips. Mama. The words slipped out like a prayer spoken by instinct rather than belief. It hung in the dark air for a fraction of a second, fragile and almost imaginary. Then it was gone, miles away. A cowboy shifted in his saddle and frowned. Elias Crow had been riding this land since before the lines on his face had deepened into permanent grooves. The prairie was not just something he crossed. It was something he listened to. He knew the sound of wind before rain, the silence that meant a storm was coming, the subtle wrongness that made a man sit up straighter without knowing why. Tonight, something felt off. Not dangerous exactly, just unsettled, like the land itself was holding its breath. He reined his horse to a stop and glanced toward the tree line near the old dirt road. His horse, a graying mare named Juniper, stamped once and flicked her ears forward, alert. Elias followed her gaze. The moon painted everything in pale blue and shadow, but there was nothing obvious to see. No fire, no movement, just grass bending in the wind. You hear that? He murmured, more to Juniper than to himself. She snorted softly, a sound Elias trusted more than most people. He had learned long ago that animals notice things men ignored. He listened again, holding still, letting the night settle around him. At first there was only the wind and the distant cry of a coyote. Then barely there, so faint he almost dismissed it as imagination. Came something else, a sound that did not belong. Elias tilted his head, his pulse quickening despite himself. It wasn't a cry the way calves bawled or coyotes yelped. It was thinner, broken, human. He turned Juniper toward the tree line without fully deciding to. His body moved on instinct, guided by something deeper than thought. As he rode closer, the sound came again, carried weakly on the wind. Mama. The word struck him like a physical blow. Elias drew in a sharp breath and swung down from the saddle, boots crunching softly on frost-stiff grass. His heart pounded now, loud enough that he wondered if it would drown out the sound he was trying to follow. He moved slowly, deliberately, scanning the ground. Years of working cattle had trained his eyes to spot what didn't fit. and there, half buried near the edge of the trees, was something that absolutely did not fit. A sack. It lay on its side, the top loosely knotted, dark against the pale ground. For a moment, Elias stood frozen. He had seen dead animals dumped in sacks before. He had seen cruelty. But something about this something in his chest told him to move, now, before whatever was inside that sack became something else entirely. He knelt and touched the fabric. It was cold, too cold. His fingers brushed something beneath it that moved. "No," he whispered. The word torn from him without permission. The sack twitched again, weakly. Elias's hands shook as he worked the knot loose, cursing whoever had tied it so tight. The smell of grain and damp cloth hit him first. Then he pulled the fabric back and saw her. She was impossibly small. Her face was red and blotchy from crying, her lips tinged faintly blue. Her eyes were half closed, lashes crusted with frost-kissed tears. She did not cry now. She barely moved at all. For one terrifying second, Elias thought he was too late. Then her tiny chest rose. Something broke open inside him. Elias did not remember standing up. One moment he was kneeling in the grass. The next he was clutching the baby against his chest, wrapping his coat around her with frantic care. Her body was cold in a way that made panic flare white-hot behind his eyes. He pressed her closer, shielding her from the wind, rocking instinctively as if his body knew what his mind did not. "Hey," he murmured, his voice rough and useless. "Hey there. I got you. I got you." The baby made a small sound, more breath than voice, but it was enough. Elias staggered back toward his horse, every step heavy with urgency. He mounted awkwardly, holding the baby with one arm while guiding Juniper with the other. The mare seemed to understand the seriousness of the moment. She moved quickly but carefully, ears pinned forward, hooves finding the surest path in the dark. Elias's cabin was a lonely structure at the edge of the land, weathered wood and a single light that burned like a promise against the night. By the time he reached it, his hands were numb and his heart felt like it might tear itself apart. He kicked the door open and rushed inside, slamming it shut against the cold. The fire in the hearth had burned low, but he stoked it furiously, sparks flying as flames leapt back to life. He laid the baby on the table, stripping the sack away completely now. She wore nothing beneath it. No blanket, no note, no name. Elias swallowed hard, anger surging through him like a living thing. He wrapped her in one of his clean flannel shirts, then another, then held her again, close to the fire, close to him. As warmth slowly returned to her skin, her eyes fluttered open. They were dark, uncertain. She stared up at him as if trying to decide whether the world had betrayed her again. Elias met her gaze, breath hitching. "You're safe," he said, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince. "You hear me? You're safe now." The baby's lips trembled. And then, impossibly, she reached out. Her fingers curled weakly round his thumb, tiny and trusting in a way that hurt more than anything Elias had ever known. He closed his eyes, a single tear escaping before he could stop it. Outside, the wind continued to move across the prairie, indifferent and endless. But inside that small cabin, something had shifted. A life that should have ended in silence had been answered instead, not by fate, not by chance, but by a man who listened when the land whispered back. The baby survived the night, but the night did not leave Elias. Morning came slow and gray, light creeping through the cabin window like it was unsure whether it was welcome. Elias had not slept. He sat in a wooden chair beside the table where the baby lay bundled in flannel and wool, rising and falling with each fragile breath. Every sound she made pulled his attention sharp as a knife. The crackle of the fire, the faint hitch in her breathing, the tiny sighs that escaped her mouth as if she were still learning how to exist in a world that had already tried to erase her. At dawn, she cried, not the weak, broken sound from the night before, but a real cry, thin, angry, alive. Elias felt relief slam into him so hard his hands trembled. He stood clumsily, lifting her again, pacing the small cabin with long, uneven steps. He had no idea what he was doing, no idea how to feed her, how to soothe her, how to fix what had already been done. All he knew was that she was alive, and that meant something had changed forever. He wrapped her tighter, murmuring nonsense, The kind of words men spoke only when no one was around to hear them. She quieted eventually, her cheek pressed against his chest, her warmth no longer fading but growing. Elias stared down at her face, memorizing it with a desperation that surprised him. The curve of her nose, the faint crease between her brows, the small mouth that had shaped a word she should never have needed to know. Mama. The sound echoed in his mind, heavier now in daylight. Elias had never been anyone's father, never anyone's husband. The land had been enough for him, or so he told himself. He had buried his past so deep he thought it gone for good. But holding her, he felt it all stir again, the ache, the loss, the choice. He had survived but never escaped. By mid-morning, he saddled Juniper again. The nearest town was hours away, but there was no other option. The baby needed things he did not have: food, care, a doctor. He wrapped her securely against him, layers upon layers, and rode with a single-minded urgency that turned the long miles into a blur of dust and determination. People stared when he arrived. A cowboy with weathered hands and a baby clutched to his chest did not fit easily into the neat stories the town preferred. Whispers followed him into the general store, then to the small clinic where the nurse gasped openly when she saw the child's condition. Questions came fast, sharp, suspicious. Where did you find her? Whose baby is that? What happened? Elias answered only what mattered. She was left to die, he said, voice steady despite the fire in his chest. I heard her. I took her. The doctor examined the baby carefully, his face tightening as he noted the signs of exposure. She's lucky, he said finally. Another hour or two out there, and he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Lucky. Elias looked down at the child and knew luck had nothing to do with it. The sheriff came that afternoon. He was a big man with tired eyes and a notebook he didn't seem eager to open. He asked questions gently, but the weight of them pressed down hard all the same. Elias told him everything: the road, the sack, the voice in the dark. The sheriff listened without interruption, jaw tight, pen moving slowly. Someone will be looking for her, the sheriff said eventually, or running from the fact they left her. Elias said nothing. If no family comes forward, the sheriff continued, the county will take custody. Foster system, maybe adoption, if she's lucky. That word again. Elias felt something rise up in him, fierce and unyielding. She already has a place, he said before he could stop himself. The sheriff studied him. You sure about that? Elias looked at the baby, now sleeping peacefully in his arms, unaware of how close the world had come to swallowing her whole. I am, he said. The process was not simple. It was slow, tangled in paperwork and suspicion and rules that did not care about instincts or promises. Whispered at dawn, but days turned into weeks, and no one came to claim her. No desperate mother, no broken father, only silence and the memory of a sack left in the cold. Elias named her Mercy. It wasn't a name he had planned. It simply arrived one night as he rocked her by the fire, watching snow fall outside the window. Mercy, because she had been denied it and given it all at once. Mercy, because she had forced it into his life without asking permission. The cabin changed. Bottles replaced tools on the table. A cradle Elias built with his own hands sat near the hearth. He learned her cries, her rhythms, the way she calmed when he hummed low and off-key. Sleep became rare, but purpose replaced exhaustion in a way Elias had never known. Yet the past did not stay. Buried. One evening, as the wind howled like it had that first night, Elias sat staring into the fire while Mercy slept. The flames pulled memories from him he had avoided for years. Another winter, another loss, another child he had not been able to save, a wife buried beneath snow and grief and mistakes he could never undo. He had walked away from life then, choosing land over love because land did not leave. Now love had found him anyway. He rested a hand on Mercy's small chest, feeling the steady beat beneath his palm. I won't leave, he whispered. It was a vow as much to himself as to her. The truth came in spring. A woman appeared at the edge of Elias's land, thin and shaking, eyes hollowed by fear and regret. She did not step closer at first. She simply stood there, staring at the cabin like it might reject her if she moved too fast. Elias knew before she spoke. I heard. She began, voice breaking. I heard someone found her. Anger surged through him, sharp and immediate. You left her, he said flatly. In the cold, the woman collapsed to her knees. She cried, then not softly, not politely, but with the kind of grief that clawed its way out because it had nowhere else to go. She told her story in fragments: poverty, fear, a man who vanished the moment she said she was pregnant, a choice made in panic that would haunt her forever. I thought, she sobbed, I thought maybe God would take her, that she wouldn't feel it. Elias felt the words hit him like blows. He looked back at the cabin where Mercy slept, warm and alive, and understood how thin the line had been between life and silence. She did feel it. He said quietly, but she lived. The woman never asked to take Mercy back. She only asked to see her. Elias hesitated, then stepped aside. The woman stood over the cradle, tears dripping onto the wood Elias had shaped with shaking hands months earlier. Mercy stirred, eyes opening, and for a moment the world held its breath. The woman reached out, then stopped herself. She's safe, she whispered. That's all I ever wanted. When she left, she did not look back. Years later, Mercy would ask about that night. Elias would tell her the truth, gently, honestly. He would tell her she was chosen, not abandoned, that a voice in the dark had changed a man's life forever. And on quiet evenings, when the wind moved through the prairie just right, Elias would swear he could still hear it, not a cry this time, but a promise. Life answering life. Mercy learned the shape of the land before she learned the shape of the world. She grew up with dirt under her fingernails and wind in her hair, with sunrise marking the start of each day and Elias's quiet presence anchoring every night. The prairie raised her as much as he did. It taught her patience, endurance, and the language of silence. By the time she was 5, she could recognize Juniper's footsteps before the mare came into view. By 7, she knew when a storm was coming just by the way the air pressed against her chest. Elias never lied to her, but he did not rush the truth either. He spoke of her beginnings with care, like a man handling something cracked but precious. She knew she had been found. She knew she had been cold. She knew someone had left her where the night could have taken her. But she also knew this: Elias had heard her. He had chosen her. That truth rooted itself deep inside her, growing stronger with each passing year. Yet children feel what adults try to soften. Sometimes Mercy woke from dreams she could not explain, dreams of darkness, of not being able to move, of calling out and wondering if anyone would answer. She would pad quietly down the hall to Elias's room, standing in the doorway until he stirred. He always did. He always opened his eyes like he had been waiting. I'm here, he would say, before she spoke, and she would climb into the chair beside his bed, leaning into his side, listening to his heartbeat until the echoes of the dream faded. As she grew older, Mercy noticed the way people in town looked at her, curious, cautious, sometimes kind, sometimes not. Stories had a way of traveling faster than truth, and hers had become something half legend. The sack, the cowboy, the voice in the dark. Some called it fate, others called it coincidence. Mercy didn't argue either way. She only knew that the story lived inside her bones, shaping how she saw the world. She was not fragile, but she was fiercely aware of how easily she could have vanished. That awareness made her gentle in a way that surprised people. She helped without being asked. She listened when others spoke. She paid attention to the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones who reminded her somehow of herself. Elias aged without complaint. His hair went fully gray. His hands stiffened, his movements slowed. But he never lost the habit of listening. He still paused at night, still tilted his head to the wind, still trusted the subtle signals of the land. Mercy watched him with a mix of admiration and fear, knowing even as a teenager that nothing, not even love, could stop time. They had their arguments about school, about town, about Mercy wanting more than the prairie could give her. Elias never tried to cage her dreams, but the thought of the cabin without her weighed heavy in his chest. You're meant for more, he told her once, voice tight. Just don't forget where you came from. She didn't. When Elias fell ill, it happened quietly. No dramatic collapse, no warning signs that demanded attention, just fatigue that lingered too long, pain he brushed off until it could no longer be ignored. Mercy sat beside his bed the way he had once sat beside hers. watching each breath like it mattered more than anything else in the world. "You saved me," she said one night, tears slipping free despite her effort to hold them back. Elias smiled faintly. "No," he said. "You saved me first. You just didn't know it yet." In the end, Elias went the way he had lived, without spectacle, without fear. Mercy held his hand as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the room gold. His last words were barely a whisper, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. "Listen," he said. Then he was gone. The prairie mourned him in its own way. The wind softened. The nights grew quiet. Mercy buried him beneath the wide sky he loved, standing alone until darkness fell. Grief hollowed her out, but it did not break her. She had learned from the best how to survive what should not be survivable. Mercy did not leave the land, not at first. She stayed long enough to grieve, to remember, to understand that the cabin was more than wood and nails. It was a promise kept. Eventually, though, she began to travel. She studied. She worked with children no one else listened to. Babies born into silence. Kids discarded by systems too busy to hear small voices. She carried Elias with her in everything she did. Years later, she returned to the prairie as a woman grown, standing at the edge of the same dirt road where her life had nearly ended. The grass moved in the wind, indifferent and eternal. Mercy closed her eyes and breathed deeply, listening not for sorrow, but for understanding. She knelt and pressed her palm to the ground. "I lived," she whispered. The wind answered, brushing past her like a hand on her shoulder. Mercy smiled through tears. She knew now that survival was not the end of the story, it was the beginning of responsibility. To hear, to answer, to choose compassion when it would be easier to turn away. Somewhere, someday, another tiny voice would call out in the dark, and because of a cowboy who listened, someone else would know how to answer. The call came on an ordinary night. Mercy was in a small office 2 states away, long past sunset. Paperwork spread across her desk in untidy stacks. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that hummed softly in the ears. She had learned to recognize it, the space where memories slipped in uninvited. She had just reached for her coat when the phone rang. She almost ignored it. Something made her answer. The voice on the other end was shaken, struggling to stay professional. A social worker, rural county, emergency situation. A baby found near a service road, wrapped poorly, exposed to the cold. Alive but barely. Mercy closed her eyes before the words even finished landing. She didn't ask why they had called her specifically. She already knew. Stories had a way of echoing through time, finding the people shaped to answer them. She was on the road within minutes, hands steady on the wheel, heart pounding with a familiarity that felt both cruel and sacred. The drive stretched endlessly. Night pressed in from all sides, headlights cutting narrow paths through the dark. Mercy listened not to music, not to the radio, but to the silence between her breaths. Memories rose unbidden, frost-bitten grass, a voice she could not remember using. A man who had listened when the world had not. By the time she arrived at the small clinic, dawn was just beginning to soften the horizon. The baby was smaller than Mercy expected. Too still, too quiet, wrapped in thin blankets that did their best to make up for what should never have been missing. Mercy approached slowly, every step weighted with reverence. The room smelled of antiseptic and exhaustion. Machines hummed softly, indifferent to the miracle they were preserving. She stood beside the crib and looked down. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the baby stirred, a tiny brow furrowed, lips parted, and a sound emerged barely audible, fragile as breath on glass. "Mama." Mercy inhaled sharply. The room seemed to fall away. Time folded in on itself. She was no longer a woman standing in a clinic. She was a voice traveling across decades, a promise finally keeping itself. Her hand moved without hesitation, fingers brushing the baby's chest, warm and real and alive. "I'm here," Mercy whispered. "You're not alone." The baby quieted, fingers curling weakly in the air. Mercy stayed like that for a long time, listening to the rhythm of a life that had almost slipped past the world unnoticed. She understood now fully what Elias had felt kneeling in the frost. The terror, the rage, the overwhelming, undeniable pull to protect. Some stories did not repeat themselves. They waited for someone to finish them differently. Weeks later, Mercy stood once more beneath the open sky of the prairie. She had brought the baby with her, bundled warmly, sleeping against her chest. The cabin was gone now, reclaimed by time and weather, but the land remained. Endless, listening, Mercy walked to the place where it had all begun, where a life had been answered instead of ignored. She knelt slowly, careful not to wake the child, and pressed her palm to the earth the way she had years before. The wind moved through the grass, familiar and gentle. "I heard her," Mercy said softly. "Just like you did." She imagined Elias standing nearby, hat low, eyes kind, listening as he always had. She imagined him nodding, not proud, not surprised, just certain, the way he always had been. Mercy looked down at the baby, who shifted and sighed. "Alive and safe, this time," she whispered. "I was ready." The wind passed over them, carrying the sound of the prairie far and wide. Somewhere, another life would begin, because someone chose to listen, because a tiny voice mattered, because one answered call had taught the world how to respond to the next. And the night at last did not win.